Welcome to Sigma Solver, guys. Before I start the video, I want you guys to smash the like button. This helps the YouTube algorithm and keeps me motivated. And if you are new here, then subscribe to my channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss an update. So without any further ado, let's get started. Today we are going to look at a different tutorial where we will understand the backend architecture of a invoicing and subscription model, and for this tutorial we will be using a no code low code tool which is based on web browser, right? So anybody who is like not completely familiar with the coding languages can use basically this browser made backend tool to quickly get started, right? So that you don't end up spending a lot of time learning the backend and just get to your customers as soon as possible. All right, so first we'll look at the invoicing system. So for that we'll give a shot to some of the things that we'll understand first. First is the invoicing logic, right? So for invoicing logic, if what we can do is, I have this endpoint sheet which we'll use and refer back and forth in this tutorial. So let's start with create an invoice, correct? So we'll go here, and this is the API endpoint, right? So this is the endpoint URL which the front end will call and basically do the job, which is the post, right? So we post it here, perfect. And then these are the inputs. So inside Xano we have like input, function stack and response, right? So all logic happens in the function stack. This is the API part of Xano. So this is the portion which like gets sent or is responsible for receiving data or sending data to the front end. This is the JSON object, right, for invoice which we'll receive. Then this is the custom function. So Xano allows to use previously made functions inside API endpoints. So here we see invoice object as the JSON you can say object here, and that we are passing from the input. Now what is the output for this one? If we try to go down, let me put it up here, we'll see that the response is the function one, right? So whatever response we'll get from this custom function will return that. Okay, now let's try to understand what is inside invoice creation. So for invoice creation we are doing a couple of steps, we'll understand those. So first is the create variable. So just as in you do in a JavaScript, to create a variable we have this function, and then we put subtotal as 0. Okay, for each loop inside here what we are doing is we are looping over the invoice items inside the invoice object. So let me pull up a invoice object real quick. Okay, so now we have like the invoice object. We'll go there, and inside this function we'll use this as the invoice object. Wait, let me put it here. Okay, what I'll do is I'll cross this and put it here, format this, right? And I'll now put my self up top here. So now what we'll see is basically the way we are trying to get this one. The invoice object contains the invoice items, right? And then down below we have all these things, the data that we are trying to send over to the database, which we will see in a bit. And yeah, that's it, right? So let's try to do maybe quantity 4, right? And yeah, that's it. Let's try to run this. So we are basically doing all these processing. Now let's try to understand what is this process going on and how we are doing with these ones. So the orange you can say variables that we see to the right are the return. So each line is kind of a function which takes an input and gives us an output. So the first line is the invoice object, right, which we are getting. The next one is again a variable initiation of subtotal. Then there is like for each loop which we are doing here, invoice object dot invoice item, and then we are like, you can say like for every loop as in coding languages we had I, right, for I in 1 to 10. Similarly, item is doing that iterating variable. Then we are like for each individual item which is here, we are taking its unit price. Then what we are doing is we are adding that to subtotal. Now in Xano, you have like different functions here, right? So like let's say add. So you know now that okay, this is how I need to basically add two entities. Now this is mentioned as 2 and 3, but 2 and 3 can ideally be variables. And for like taking variables out of here, we can use like you can say $sign. Then we have all the inline variables which we have defined with the gear icon, right? And then like the other ones which you see like env input and stuff, these are the ones which system provides, right? We'll understand what is env in a bit, but let's say input. So then if I put a dot here, dot operator, we know that okay, we can get the invoice object, right? So that's how you use the expressions tab. So this is like the expressions tab, we can use this, and that's it, right? Once you are like good with this one, then you can test this out in playground, right? So that no existing function will be hit. You can see that the context was this one, which is the input which we have given, and it took that and then made this call, correct? We'll update and close, and so that's it, right? Always you will find a save button. Auto save can also be turned on, that's fine, but the idea is like whatever you do gets saved when you click on the save button, right? Now coming back, so that was that. Now for each item we are multiplying the quantity to the unit price here, right? And then we are adding it to the subtotal, right? That was one part of it. Now we have to calculate the discount, right? What we are doing is basically calculating all these things, right? So if we go back, we'll find that invoice object, we are checking whether the invoice discount number is 0 or not. So if that is 0, then obviously this won't run. But if it is not 0, right? So there are two things. One is invoice discount number and one is invoice discount percentage, right? Either of them will be non-zero, right? So in that instance, what we are trying to do is calculating the discount. So for invoice discount number, we'll simply put it, right, whatever we get from the invoice object, which is invoice object dot invoice discount number, fine. But for this one, what we are doing is we are converting it to the invoice item total multiply decimal from percent. Now just for information's sake, if we go back, this is decimal from percent, which is just converting that percentage which we are getting into a decimal number, right, by multiplying it with 0.1. And then once we are done with that, then we are basically updating the variable which is discount calculated by multiplying all item total, right, which we are calculating. So in this one I have made a small mistake. We need to do like all item total isn't even there, so we'll use subtotal. Okay, update and close. Now we'll have to save this, and now once we are done with that, so now we have the discount calculated, right, which is fine from the percentage. Now what we are trying to do is we'll subtract this, of course, from the subtotal, right? So this time we are not creating a variable. This is the update, right? We've been using this one. So update variable is different from create variable. Once we calculate the subtotal, then we calculate the first tax. So for that we are just nesting it up, subtotal multiplied by 0.1 times of the tax rate, correct? And then we'll have like whatever tax we want to charge for this one, and then this goes for the second tax and so on, right? We are just doing the two of them for now, and then we are calculating the total tax by adding these two. Once that gets done, we then have the invoice total. So invoice total is of course the subtotal and the total tax Once we have that, then we can add the record to the table. Now I'll just move myself to the left. We see that all that we have calculated above, now we can put it against that field. Now I'll explain where these fields are coming from, but for now let's just understand that these fields were already there. Okay, so for expression, I think I haven't told this before, is for expression you can click here and then it opens the expression tab where you can basically change and add stuff there, right? So invoice date, invoice discount number, invoice discount percentage, first tax, second tax, subtotal and stuff, right? Now these things are something that we don't just have yet, right? What is the partial payment, what is the late payment and stuff. So for those, we can simply exclude these from the input just now, right? We'll exclude them. Then we have these ones which we are planning to include as well, and that's it. So we'll save, and that's done. Now the invoice is there, right? But we need one more thing. We need the timeline, right? When invoice was getting created, when it is getting paid, is it a partial payment or not, stuff like that. So for that we are using this one, right? So this is very you can say simple, is just take the invoice ID from the above, right? So as we can see, like this has 3 tabs, correct, but the add one, and the output returns you the added invoice. Whatever invoice gets added is returned here. So and we see that the return as is the variable name that it gets returned as in form, right? So it is called invoice one. So what we'll do is we'll have this, and of course like there is this settings tab, so where you can like describe this, what we are trying to do and stuff, but yeah, that's it. So and then we inside invoice timeline we have the invoice one.id, whichever id we are getting from the invoice when it is generated. We take the event type as invoice created, invoice total is the total amount, invoice created, system new invoice, fine. So that's it. Okay, so we'll try to run this again and see if it works. Yep, so fine. Now what we are trying to do is, now let's go back to the database and try to see if we are able to add invoices or not. So there are a lot of invoices here. So now if we look at the last one, or today is August 3rd, so August would be, yep. So this is the one that has the invoice date, right, and its total should be 84.24, right, which we just saw in the tab. So this is how we can create an invoice, and these are tables are, you can say, pretty much same to the SQL tables or Supabase, which is like very popular these days, right? So that's like there. And the good news of this one is we can do a lot of things here, I'll tell you. So one is the invoice schema, which is this schema which you can see. Then there are like references which use this table, so we can get those. Then there is the indexes for searching, and then there is like, so this is keyboard shortcuts, nothing much, but indexes is very powerful in terms of searching and stuff. Then there are like triggers, right? So triggers can be of many types, we'll see that. Let me go a bit left. So if we try to add a trigger, you see we can do a lot of things here, which is like, let's suppose you add a record to the table and then you want to do some function, correct? So for that we have inserts, then if we update and then we do something, so we have updates and deletes and so on. What I'll do is I'll explain you a previously done trigger. So this is the email notification part of it. So what we are trying to do is, whenever a action, right, so we get 4 items here: new, old, action and data source. For the action of insertion, when the insert action is called, basically a new row is created, then we are sending the invoice to the mail as well, right? So we are using SendGrid for that, right? So this is how we are sending it, right? This is another, you can say, important and crucial functionality of Xano, where we can make external API calls, right? Even you can make an API call to the another Xano API as well, right? So that you can do. And the good news here is, like, you simply put your credentials and the post request, and the bearer key is what you can put here. Now one thing which you'll see is, when you do like string concatenation, we have to do something like this, like the tilde is there and the double quotes. So this is how we basically um, do the string concatenation, and yeah, then we can basically send an invoice to the particular person. So that's one part. Next is, like, this is one thing, right? So we saw that how we can basically use invoicing to do all sorts of triggers. Okay, now we have landed to the settings panel, right? And here you will find all the environment variables. So everything that is present inside the environment will reside here, and like email and the all the API keys will are going to live here, which are going to be used across the app. So that's it. And then, like, so that is how, like, we can use invoicing in this particular instance. One more thing which is important is, like, if we want to generate the invoice, right, we want to get the file, we want to get a report. So for that I have made a function here, and functions are, you can say, like, logic defined into like separate entities and stored. So for invoice, let's go here, we see invoice report generation. So right now our business needs, like, if a user comes and we want to basically specify that, okay, from this date to a new date we want invoices, so then we do that particular filter, the invoice status, paid, pending, outstanding, and that, and by the invoice ID. So it's the same logic here, it's just the way we do the backend is, like, we have defined that if the invoice ID is not null, then we simply get the invoice by its ID, and then put it to be as a variable, right? If not, then by the status, right? And if status is also empty, then we do it by the from and to date, right? So in query all records, we can define the custom query, right? So from, so invoice date were greater than from, and invoice date less than 2. So that's how we define that. Then what we are trying to do is, we are trying to create a CSV file out of this, right? So there is this create variable, and inside that we are using a filter, right? So filters are another set of, you can say, variables that we use. So I took the variable to be reported, and then I applied the filter like this one, and then I chose CSV create, right? So if you choose CSV create from this drop down below, then it will create a CSV format data stream, which we can basically use to generate a file, right? We use the rows as to be reported, separate as comma and stuff. You can define this as per your needs, but yeah, it's pretty much it. Then what we do is, we define a UUID, okay, and then we create the file resource. So in Xano, you have to create a file resource. So for that, we define the name with the extension report file.csv, and we take the data from x1, right, from here. Once we do that, then we'll have to create the attachment, right? So attachment is something you can say as like file instance. So for that, we create the file instance here, and then we add the record to the reports table, right? This is the report ID. We take x2 in that, and then we give it the report file, which is x3. Now generate UUID is very simple. It just generates a unique identifier each time, which you can use in your database requests. Okay, so now we'll see how the table for reports is looking like. Reports, here is the report, right? So you use the report ID to basically get a row, and then it will return you the report file. So let's suppose we take this, and then I have created another function to basically give me the report, right? We'll run this, we'll use this one again, right. So with that said, now like I'll run this, so we get the URL, right? If we copy this and put it in a new tab, then you'll see that we get the report file, right? So if we save this, then so now we see that we have the CSV file with us. Right now it's up to us that how we want to put it and send it to different file formatters and stuff, but we got it. Okay, now that was the report creating. So now just looking at it, yeah, one more thing which you can use in you can say uh, backend building is something like, okay, you created an invoice, you paid an invoice, you want in-app notifications, correct? So whether the invoice is paid or not, we want some sort of you can say intimation. So for that we can use, and in Xano there is one powerful feature which is like control plus K, so you can use that to basically get here, and then push notification, right? So for like in app notifications, if we go to database and invoices again, right, and then like myself a bit and then click on trigger. So status invoice messenger, this is the one, right? For this particular app we are using one signal, and what it does is basically takes in the action, right? Whether it's, you can say create invoice or edit invoice, we take that one signal app ID which you will get once you register in one signal, and then this is the new dot client ID, whatever new client we have, as the player ID, right? So who will receive the information, and then it's like your invoice item ID has been marked as paid and thank you, and this is the one signal REST API key. So with that like in mind, we now know that how to basically send push notifications as well, right? So that's one thing. Now one more important logic is like the recurrent subscription function. So we know that in subscriptions there is like automatic payments, right? So we need to make that logic how payment will be made automatically. So before we come to this one, we'll look at another important topic, which is like how to make payments, right? So for this tutorial we are using Phoenix payment gateway, right? So these are like you can say the payment business for these ones, right? They have their documentation which we'll refer back and forth. Yep. So for getting started, I guess they have started. Yep. So this is kind of the thing that we'll use is first create an identity for our buyers, right? So we'll use that. Then after we create that identity, we need to make this tokenized parameter, which we'll see how we are doing. And once we do that, then it is time to like create or make a payment, right? So we'll have all these steps. What one thing which we'll remember is this particular screen, right? So all the card numbers and stuff will be given to payment portal at Phoenix, which will be a pop-up, and that form will give us back the um, token ID, right? So as you can see, this guy is putting all these things, pay now, then it gives them back a token ID, right? We'll see all these things in our function stack is itself. So for creating a buyer, we'll first see this one. So it is the form submission, then we have the create buyer entity. So what we are doing is basically putting the Phoenix username and password from the environment, and then using all the details that we are getting in the form, right? You can use the set parameter to basically fill in here, right? It should be exactly the same way that they have given, right? And one important feature of Xano is you can copy this entire curl and then like maybe add a new function. And I'll not save this, but just showing you guys is if you click on import curl, paste it and import, so it loads everything up, right? Which is super dope, and it reduces dev time very significantly, and you can then start working on the function stack immediately. So this is the create identity endpoint, and you can see like you can put descriptions like this. So for putting descriptions, you just simply click on this one, right, and then you can edit it here, right? So for that we make that request. Now this basically allows to get the, what do you say, the identity, okay, for the buyer. And once we have that, then what we are doing is basically getting the API dot response dot result dot ID, which is the token ID, and then putting it in the buyer identity table. So if we go to databases and do the buyer table thing, then here we are storing the Phoenix ID, right, which we are getting, and the identity object, okay. So once we have these two, now we have the buyer, okay. What we want to do next is basically create the payment instrument. So for that we have another table, API endpoints. So now, since like due to GDPR compliance and other you can say security measures, Xano is not yet I'll say most suitable for storing credit card informations, right, for customers. We are using, that's why we are using Phoenix Payments Gateway to store those informations. So for that we'll use this endpoint, right, and then like this is basically the next form. This form is a bit different, as you will see that it is to contain two things. One is the merchant ID and the token ID, right? Token is what we get from the form which you saw above, right here. This will return us a token ID. So for from that we'll use that, and then inside the payment Phoenix payment instruments function, we'll again encode these two guys, right, the password, and then from the form submission we'll pass in the token and the identity. Now identity is something that got created here, right? So this and the token that is generated from the front end is something that we are now using to create the payment instrument, right? Token and instrument are different. So this will return us a like payment instrument, which then we are basically storing in the database for payment instruments. Payment instrument, right? This is the payment instrument ID. Now once we do that, so now we are basically ready to do the transfer, right? If we go to library, and just to note that, so now we are ready to do the create transfer, right? So what we need is three things: the merchant ID, right, like who's going to receive it, the instrument ID, and the invoice ID, these three things. So first we make the request with the merchant ID and the instrument ID, and this is the, like you can say, authorization token. We make that response, right, the response result, and then we store that transfer logs, whatever transfer has happened, whether it's failed or not, here. Once we have that, then we like get the invoice from the invoice ID above, right, get invoice from the invoice ID. Then we check if the transaction is succeeded or not, so we edit it accordingly, right, make it partial, right. So for here we'll have partial, okay. Next, if it's pending, if it's failed, stuff like that, and that's how we handle the payment. response. Okay, so that's done. Now let's return back to our tasks. Now tasks in Xano is something that like allows for cron jobs to run behind the scenes, right? In the event of, let's say, subscriptions, we want all this transfer, payment, processing, everything to be happening at maybe 12 a.m. each day, right? And just check whose subscription is ending and then just like do the next cycle, right? So for that, we are querying all subscription records with subscription counter less than 5. We check the list and then we put the current time as now. So for each subscription, now remember, query all records always by default returns as a array, right, of objects. So we take that and then for each subscription we basically loop over and see if the subscription status is pending and the cycle end time is less than current time, right? We'll see the subscription table, one sec, subscriptions table. Okay, so here we are seeing that like two things. If the subscription counter is less than the number of cycles and the status is pending and the cycle end date is older than the current date, right, then we will basically do this processing. So edit subscription record, add the invoice, do all these stuff, right, and then create transfer. So edit subscription is simple, we just edit it, right? We add the subscription counter by 1, but for cycle end date we do an interesting thing. If I bring myself down a bit, we'll see for like the hard, like you can say building part of it, where okay, for each month we need to know when to transition this. That heavy lifting is done by Xan, right? So it just simply takes the cycle end date and transforms it to a timestamp, right, as you can see here, and then adds 1 month to it. Simple, right? So that's how basically it allows for ease of updating the cycle, right? We'll discard these changes and yeah, that's it. Okay, now then we add record in invoice, right, with the subscription price and everything, because it is getting renewed, so that would be an invoice which will be sent to the customer. Invoice timeline, organization, we are using the organization to basically get the organization ID which is linked to this subscription. Then we get the payment instrument from the organization ID, and then inside create transfer we send like the invoice data and everything, right? So for this one we'll just simply send let me see, invoice 1 dot, and one thing which is also important is invoice 1. If I click here, you'll see properties here. You can simply click on that and then choose the ID, right? No need to basically manually remember that what was the field and what was the property. So we'll save this and then we just simply nest it to the custom function of create transfer we just saw. Okay, with that said, now we have like everything set up. Now if we go back and try to look for what is left, so all this is done, all this is done. Yeah, now let's look at AI MCP logic. So this is apparently very new to Xano as well, is something that you can create an MCP server, right? And in that you can basically put all your functions here. Okay, and this is important because like once you have your important stuff here, you can basically use a single URL, which is this one, to connect it via SSE and then use it inside, right? So MCP server building is also very helpful, while the tools are the actual tools that you need to define, right? Create those from the function, and here is what you can basically put the tool instructions to help the AI understand. Okay, so that was the MCP logic building. Now one more thing which we'll see is the authentication, right? All this is fine, but how about authentication? So for authentication, we are using the logic inside Xano. So we get the user first, right, for sign up, and then we add the user in the user table, right, from here, and then we create the authentication token, right. This is something that Xano provides us with out of the box, right. Then we put it inside the name, we create the name, and then we create the send grid, like basically function to send us the email, right, the authentication email. And one thing which I have learned over the time is, like, if you are in a place where you want to go back, right, don't use the back button inside Xano, use this one, right. So yeah, okay. Now login is something that we'll use. So remember that inside Xano, like, we can hash the password, right. How? If we go to users table, not this one, this one, okay. So we have like password. So this one, if we see, its type is password, so ideally no one can see that, right. It's already hashed. Now the fun part of this one is, for validating password, it's very easy now, right, because Xano has hashed it. So Xano knows the you can say what is the password, right. So it knows it hashed that, and it can revalidate it for us. So if we click on back, here you see we check if the user is not null, this is a precondition, then we validate the password. We receive the text input from the front end, right, which is the new login, and then we use it with the user password, right. Once we get that, because we will get it from the email, right, the user, and then we create the authentication token and then send it back to the user. So that's how you authenticate it without, like, you can say uh, any much hassle on the JWT token and stuff like that, private key and stuff. So that is handled inside Xano. Now yeah, we've seen everything. So yeah, that's been it. You can simply create the same logics against like everybody else. Now one more thing which is important is, like, Xano allows for pre-built CRUD operators as well. So if you create a like database, let's say I create a database, right, so I can basically auto create API endpoints, right. It will create all the endpoints for me, like, which we'll see just in a sec. If we go to API OS building, you see all these were automatically created when the table was created, right, which is super fast. And we can use authentication routes here. You can simply put the authentication here, right. You can use like multiple authentication, client, user, and yeah, everything can be done in that manner. One important thing is also there is the middlewares, right. So for middleware, if we go to library, you see middleware, we can create a middleware that will sit for all the functions, all the endpoints and stuff, right. We can allow for merge or replace. So whatever response we get from the middleware, we can merge it or we can replace it by the actual function message. So exception can also be handled here. So there are multiple things that we do inside the backend that can be handled inside Xano. Unit testing is also there, workflow tests, and yeah, that's kind of a wrap for today, I'll say, because we've covered like the bunch of it, right. So that's kind of it. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions, and if you want a more like detailed tutorial or anything, a deep dive into Xano and how we use it, then feel free to join the community by clicking the link in the description, right. So if you join the Sigma Solver community, then we'll also provide the exact hands-on tutorial, right, with live sessions on how to create your own custom backend inside Xano with no additional fee, right. So that's kind of it. So we went through all of that, but we didn't went back to the PPT, right. So we covered all these things up. Now, so this is the actual link which you will find in the description below. and basically you can use it to go to our landing page and then subscribe to our community, right? It's 1499 per month. So that's kind of it. If you still have any doubts, then feel free to reach out in the comment section below. If you liked this video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for the upcoming videos. Till then, happy solving.
Hey there, before you go, I've got some fantastic content lined up for you. Over here, we've got some videos and playlists you might enjoy. But first, if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so that you never miss out on any of our future uploads. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.